Okay, I think, is everybody in? Are we good to? Okay. Yep. Okay, I think we're ready to start. My name's Emily Waterfield. I'm going to moderate today, so you don't need me here for long. We're here for today's event is on the road to resilience, how the EU production of renewable fuels can foster road transport defossilisation, food security and industrial strategic autonomy. As a journalist, I'd say that needs unpicking a little bit. To be clear, the main topics I think today, we're looking at EU renewable fuel production, how that affects defossilisation of road transport, which we know is a big deal. A quarter of emissions come from the road sector, and strengthen food security. We're also going to touch on economic value, keeping economic value within our borders, building resilience, and fostering strategic autonomy. The main question, I think, is can renewable fuels help the EU to reconcile climate objectives with economic competitiveness, particularly keeping in mind industrial strategic autonomy, which is perhaps an even bigger deal now, given the turbulence we're currently living in everywhere outside this lovely, safe EU we are in. So I'm going to pass, first of all, to our first keynote speaker, David Carpintero, Director General of the European Renewable Ethanol Association, or ePURE as it's known. He's going to make some introductory remarks talking about renewable ethanol, tell us a bit about renewable ethanol as a European solution, and a little about a topic that I very much like, the idea of climate realism. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Emily. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for joining this evening. I'm just going to give here some brief remarks about the topic that has been explained by Emily. And as ePURE, we are really pleased as well to be a partner on the organization of this event. Europe has committed to climate neutrality by 2050, and decarbonizing transport, as Emily said, especially road transport, is one of the most complex parts in this transition. But how we get there, and whether we get there at all, depends on the decisions that we make now. For years, the dominant political narrative has suggested that there was only one acceptable pathway to decarbonizing road transport: full electrification. However, we live in a real world with an existing vehicle fleet, with an existing energy infrastructure, with existing value chains, and with farmers that grow crops that are selling now at lower and lower prices. If we are serious about decarbonization, we need a strategy that also works for the fleet that we will have for the next 10 years, and that works as well for European farmers, and that is socially inclusive. We need to use all solutions to deliver greenhouse gas reductions. This means recognizing that renewable ethanol and other low carbon fuels are not competitors to electrification. Rather, they are an essential partner to it. Today, Europe has 250 million internal combustion vehicles on the road. Increasingly, many of these, and we'll hear more from Hans today, are hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and range extenders. All these vehicles can be powerful contributors to the transport energy transition if we allow them to run on sustainable low-carbon fuels. Last year, ePURE members produced 7 billion liters of renewable ethanol from European feedstocks, delivering, in average, 79% greenhouse gas emission savings compared to fossil petrol. And this is certified and audited. And Europe's ethanol sector does more than decarbonize mobility. It produces 7 million tons of high-protein food and feed, strengthens food autonomy, supplies biogenic CO2, supports rural economy, and reinforces our bioeconomy. This is not a projection. It is happening here and now. Looking forward, E20 gasoline blends could be a reality on European gas stations in just a few years. Europe's automotive industry is also starting to develop flex fuel and hybrid powertrains that can run on higher ethanol blends like E85. A strong example is Horse, the Renault-Geely joint venture represented here today that is developing some of these innovative multi-fuel powertrains. These technologies combine electrification with renewable fuels, offering a practical, scalable, and cost-effective pathway to net zero. But unless the regulatory framework recognizes them, they risk being penalized, along with the jobs and the emission reductions that they deliver. Under today's CO2 standards in the EU, vehicles are judged only by tailpipe emissions. For example, a hybrid running on E85 gasoline blend is penalized, while a coal-powered BEV is counted as zero emission, even if its GHG life cycle emissions are higher. This is not climate effective, and certainly it is not technology neutral. Commissioner Chichikostas, yesterday, in an event organized by CLEPA, the Automotive Component Association, reaffirmed the principle of technology neutrality. This is welcome, but now it must be translated into policy. We need a policy shift from tailpipe-only metrics to true life cycle assessment, supporting every viable decarbonization pathway. That coming proposal for the revision of the CO2 standards is the time to correct this. However, if we fail, we risk overlooking these ready, socially inclusive, and strategically important solutions. So we urge EU policymakers to, first, recognize renewable ethanol as a core contributor to decarbonizing transport. Second, support hybrid, plug-in hybrids, and flex fuel vehicles that combine electrification with sustainable fuels. And third, integrate agriculture and industry into a coherent bioeconomy strategy. The technology exists, the fuel is available, and the infrastructure is in place. Let me conclude with this. Electrification is necessary, but is not sufficient. Europe must use every tool it has. Renewable ethanol is also a European solution, ready, scalable, and deeply rooted in our agricultural and industrial systems. The only successful transition is the one that works for every citizen in Europe. With that, I look forward to hearing more on this from our distinguished panel of speakers who will bring their own expertise and perspective to this important discussion, from farming to biorefineries to the automotive industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's great to already have some policy guidance at this early stage, because that's always crucial to the kind of audience that we have. But also your message that this is not, we're not in a laboratory. This is the real world. We need to work with what were the solutions that we have, rather than some theoretical future. We're now delighted. Our second keynote speaker, we're delighted to have MEP Benoît Cassart with us, who's going to talk to us a little bit as well about the same issues, but broadening on why the EU production of renewable fuels really matters. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, today Europe stands at the crossroads. Our transport sector, responsible for nearly a quarter of EU greenhouse gas emissions, still depends heavily on imported fossil fuels. But there is a powerful solution at hand: the European production of renewable fuels. These fuels can at the same time accelerate road transport, the de-fossilization, strengthen our food security, and secure Europe's industrial autonomy. The automotive industry represents a major part of our economic fabric. 1.4 million direct jobs, 13 million indirect jobs, and nearly 7% of the EU's GDP. Yet, it's going through a deep crisis with a significant drop in sales, especially in the electric vehicle sector, which has seen its sales collapse by almost 44% between August 2023 and August 2024. While electric mobility will play a major role, it cannot yet cover all segments. heavy-duty trucks, long-distance bus, and existing vehicle fleets need sustainable liquid fuels. In this context, it is vital to understand that decarbonization and competitiveness are not opposing force. On the contrary, they go hand in hand. Decarbonization is the key to our competitiveness. The transport sector remains heavily dependent on fossil fuel, which are responsible for a large share of greenhouse gas emissions in Europe. By developing an European production of renewable fuel, including advanced and conventional biofuel, bioethanol, sustainable biogas, e-fuel, we can reduce this dependence, lower our carbon footprint, and support sustainable mobility. Diversifying the available low-carbon mobility alternative will enable us to better meet the needs of European citizens by 2035 and beyond. But acting for the environment is not enough. We must also ensure food security. The link between renewable fuels and food security is essential. To maintain our competitiveness, we need to include both first and second generation biofuel, which have sometimes been criticized for their impact on agricultural land and food crops. This is room for all solutions that reduce CO2 emission. We must fully recognize the benefits of using food biomass for non-food purpose in a sustainable and responsible manner. Innovation is also allow the use of non-food raw material, organic waste, and low-impact energy crops, thereby preserving agricultural resources for feeding our population. This approach ensures that the energy transition does not come at the expense of food security. I would like to stress that the production of conventional bioethanol allows for the co-production of animal feed and greater quantities than the production of bioethanol. Thus, the production of conventional biofuel secures not only energy sovereignty, but also food sovereignty. Finally, European production of renewable fuel is a strategic issue for our industrial autonomy. In an industrial context marked by tension, reduction or dependence on fossil fuel imports and foreign technology is indispensable. In this sovereignty lever that strengthens our energy security and our economic position on the global stage. By investing in our production capacity, we not only enhance our energy security, but also our economic and technological position worldwide. We must continue to invest in our own clean energies, reduce electricity tax for our business and citizens, improve our energy infrastructure, increase support for certain strategic sectors, and ensure that our investments serve the interest of Europe, its citizens, and its companies. That is why I believe that in its current form, the Mercosur agreements do not serve the European Union's strategic interest or our ethanol sector, a pillar of the renewable transition, is now threatened by the Mercosur trade agreement, which could open the door to massive import of cheaper, less sustainable ethanol. This will endanger European producers, rural jobs, and ultimately our sovereignty over strategic energy and agricultural resources. Furthermore, trade barrier and tariff imposed by the United States further complicate the solution and threaten the stability of the European automotive industry supply chain. In the face of this challenge, the European automotive industry must provide affordable vehicle for domestic consumption and attractive product for export. Ladies and gentlemen, the road to European resilience is a path of innovation, ambition, and coherence between industrial and agricultural policies and our trade policy. This is no single solution for the furthermore of decarbonized mobility. The production of renewable fuel is a driver of competitiveness, food security, and industrial autonomy. To succeed in this transition, we must join force, invest in research, support our industry, and build a comprehensive strategy that integrates technological, industrial, regulatory, and fiscal dimension. Faced with this challenge, we have a clear choice to ensure technical and commercial domination or to show political courage and determination. Inaction is not an option. The battle for European technological and industrial sovereignty will determine the competitiveness, employment, and quality of Europeans for decades to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You started by saying we have a powerful solution. I think that was a very powerful speech. Again, this is all about the real world. This is real life, will affect our lives for decades to come and more. I will now ask our panelists, we have 4 experts, to come and join me here on stage while they take seats. I think you all have, name tags. I will run through the house rules for this. Don't let me stop you while I just give some background. Anyone who's been to one of these events before will know the debate's held under the Chatham House rule, meaning that what's said can be reported but not attributed to whoever says it. Main features of the debate: this is EU focused. We're discussing cutting-edge issues, as always. Active participation from you guys will be encouraged, and as always, the time is tight. We have more or less half an hour for the panel just now, and then half an hour for opening up to the audience, so that we can all be outside networking or going out in the very cold, horrible weather, stay here and network, drink with us at 6:30. So if I could ask my 4 panelists to join me, please. Oh, I've just been told, actually, this one is not Chatham House. So report away, put it on the front page of all newspapers. It's fine. Great, thank you very much. So, as I say, I will ask each of you experts a question to start this off, and you can give us 5 minutes of your expertise. Then I will open to the audience. We also do have Slido, which I'll try to keep an eye on with everything else. So, that will be the second stage. So, if I could ask first speaker, could I ask Alarik if you wouldn't mind taking the first questions? Alarik is Director of Public and Regulatory Affairs at Lantmännen. So perhaps you could first give us 1 or 2 minutes explaining, because we're not all familiar, what that is. I think you're probably one of the people, as an agricultural co-op, you're likely to be one of the participants with the most experience working directly with these real world people we're hearing about. And then I'll ask you a question on related to that. But if you first of all, just 1 or 2 minutes explaining about where you work.
Yes. I will. Thank you very much. Well, as said, I'm Alarik Sandrup, Director of Public Affairs at Lantmännen, and I think you pronounced it quite well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So Lantmännen, it's a farmers cooperative. We are owned by 17,000 Swedish farmers. Turnover is around 6.5 billion euro per year. We're in agribusiness, food production, and bioenergy and biorefineries. So we cover the whole value chain. We know, at least my colleagues, know everything about agriculture. I think I know a little bit myself. And we have been into biorefineries and this type of production since 1983. So we have quite a number of years of experience. And we are producing ethanol for fuel purposes with a greenhouse gas saving level of 98%. As far as I know, it's the highest in the world. From those biorefineries, we also produce functional foods. We produce protein for food and feed markets, biochemicals, and CO2. We're capturing CO2 since, I think, 11 years and producing carbonic acid from that. So, and I can say you as a proof, it was mentioned here before that the farmers, they need this because we have invested, I think, in all during the years, at least 1 billion euro in our biorefineries, and it's the farmers' money. We don't get any money from funds or any subsidies for that. So, and we're still investing. We're building one extra part of one of the biorefineries, investing roughly 10 million euro. So we still believe in it, and there's a future in this. Thank you.
Good to hear, starting on positive notes. You said you've already touched on this a bit, but a bit more about the extent to which renewable fuels can help the clean transition. I think you said a bit on that, but if there's more to say. But importantly, while assuring the affordability for lower income houses and small businesses. We've seen more than protests, actually riots about the energy prices and when vehicles are unaffordable.
I mean, it's obvious that if you have a fuel, David mentioned it here, the average level of CO2 savings in Europe, European ethanol is 79% compared to fossil petrol, and we are delivering ethanol with 98%. So if you're using that, you are reducing the CO2 emission quite a lot. And I just can compare, and I think there shouldn't be a fight between the different, let's say, sustainable alternatives to imported fossil energy. We need the biodiesel, the HVO, we need the biogas, ethanol, and electricity. And so far, it's only 7% of the total energy used for transports that is renewable. The rest is imported fossil energy. That's not good. And the emissions, they have increased, I think, since 1990, which is normally the base year, by roughly 20%. So we are not really moving in the right direction. But if you compare biofuels to electricity, and we don't have anything against electricity, we support it. But biofuels are roughly 50 times bigger in the European transport sector. So it says quite a lot, and it can increase a lot. When it comes to reducing the cost to, let's say, well, all households, but especially those that don't have high incomes, this is the cheapest way to reduce the CO2 emissions, because you can use it in the vehicles and the fleet we have in the infrastructure we have with the filling stations and everything. And we know from reports and so on that the abatement cost, the cost per ton of CO2 you want to remove, then low blend biofuels in the current infrastructure, in the current vehicles, is by far the cheapest way. I think it's for ethanol, E5, E10, E20, E85, it's about 180 euro per ton that you reduce, and then it's increasing. And I think the highest level is somewhere around 700 euro per ton of CO2. So we can deliver the cheapest solution.
And that's a very clear, very good, strong message. This is the cheapest way to reduce the CO2. I mean, that's, seems to be a no-brainer. At the risk of jumping on one solution again, but this is the cheapest way to do it. So thank you very much. I'm now going to turn to Claude Soudé, who is the Vice Chair of the Working Party on Bioenergy with COPA-COGECA, apologies. I was about to say, with my over 20 years reporting in Brussels, COPA-COGECA have always been one of the most familiar, the clearest, the most expert voices. So I'm very pleased to have you here today. Can you tell us a bit, how can the EU best use its existing bioeconomy and agricultural sectors to strengthen industrial leadership and keep some of the economic value that we already have?
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. So, as a representative of COPA-COGECA, so farmers and their cooperatives, I'm less an expert in biofuels, more in farming side. What can say that is the use of biofuels are necessary for farmers. For today, biofuel means an income for farmers. We are in a world where there are a lot of different goods today, different increase in all the production, and maybe the demand is not sufficient enough to use all this production, and we have this outlet that is biofuel that help us to manage the crops and to try to manage the income. It's not a good situation this year everywhere in Europe because we have very low prices, but if we have not biofuels, the prices will be much more lower because this is a way of using part of our production. So I'm not a specialist of ethanol, I'm more on biodiesel side. For instance, in Europe, we are not able to use 2/3 of the oilseeds, oil, for human consumption. We have to find another outlet. And if we don't have this other outlet, that is biofuel, for instance, this means that we have to reduce the production, we have to reduce the crops, and this means we have to import more. We have to import more energy, but we have to import more proteins for animals, for feeding our animals. And we are thinking that the challenge today is how to reduce importations in most of I would say different crops, for instance, but also for protein. And for this, we need a long-term strategy. We don't need things that are saying each 2 years we will change the way to produce, because with farming, we are harvesting once a year. So we need a long-time policy, a long-time strategy. And the other thing that is much more important for us, I think, is to recognize all the benefits from the bioeconomy and from the biofuels. For instance, we are producing food because it's part of it is food, feed. We are reducing the importations, increasing our sovereignty, and this is usable today. You can reduce the emissions at least 50 or 60%. It depends how it's blend or not blend or thing like that. But it can be done today at a cost that, as I said, Alarik is a lowest one today in comparison with electricity or other alternative fuels.
So we're hearing a lot about what can be done today, which is great. We don't always get that in these EU debates. Why is it not being done today? What's the main thing? Why can't we have that solution right now?
It's not what we can't increase so much the use of all these biofuels, because there are some limits. We have to produce food, but we have also to have rotations on our farms. So we are not able to increase all the productions there. And today there are a lot of people saying that we are not good enough. But by regulation, I would say, we are good because we have a minimum level of sustainability to provide. And today, because of these biofuels and all the chain on this bioeconomy, this means that we have been able to maintain processing on the rural area. We maintain jobs there. We are not saying that we want all the place. We are not able to fulfill all the demand of renewables or alternative energies. We think that this is an addition with others, but we still want to be there, to exist.
A lot more can be done already. Thank you very much. I'm now going to ask Hans Hoefnagels, who's Global Public Policy Director with Horse Powertrain, to talk to us a bit. First of all, if, as with Alarik, could you tell us a little bit about horse? Because again, it's something that people won't be automatically familiar with. And then I will put a specific question to you. So just a couple of minutes on what you do, where you work.
Yeah, so Horse Powertrain is quite a new company. Probably most of you have never heard of it before. But let me give you a little bit more context, because actually the company has more than 100 years of experience when it comes to combustion and other types of technologies. So Horse Powertrain is a joint venture, if you will, between Renault and Geely, and for a smaller part Aramco as well, in order to join forces and sort of spearhead the world when it comes to excellence in combustion technologies. It's headquartered in London, but we have two other corporate offices or main offices, one in Madrid, where I'm fortunate to work there, and as well in Gothenburg in Sweden, and where Eurobay is based. So basically the joint venture consists of two companies or divisions, if you will. One is Horse Technologies, that's in Madrid, and the other one is Eurobay, which used to make the cars combustion engines for Volvo, which is now, parent by Geely. So basically, that's what we do, right? We produce all types of combustion technologies, hybrid systems, range extenders, flex fuels, whatever that can speed up, accelerate the ecological transition. And obviously, we believe that electrification of cars is a major part in that, and should be respected and should be enhanced, and the uptake should increase. But we do believe to get there, you need other technologies too. And those other technologies that we, and of course others as well in the market, produce. We have plants in Spain, Valladolid and Seville. We also make gearboxes, which is in Seville. In Valladolid, we have our flagship engine plant, if you will, and also an R&D center. Besides that, we're in Portugal, Romania, Turkey, and then as well we have a large footprint in Latin America, Brazil primarily, but also Chile and Argentina. We have around almost 19 or 18,000 people employed, a turnover around 15 billion within that joint venture. So yeah, that's a quick intro of who we are and what we do.
Excellent, thank you very much. And it sounds like from that you'd be well placed to talk about something that David touched on briefly in the opening speech, but that is very important in this debate. The idea of technological neutrality and life cycle assessments, not just having the tailpipe. And so this life cycle assessment as a fundamental to bring CO2 down while keeping the EU competitive. And especially in the light of something that's hardly been touched on and will be very important, the upcoming revision of the CO2 standards from the Commission that I think we're hoping to get on the 10th of December, so very soon. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the key file that we're all looking into, and specifically Horse Powertrain. It's important. There's an ICE-ban, that's 2035, basically meaning that afterwards OEMs are no longer, or they can still if they will, but they will be fined if they sell still cars that emit more than 0% from the tailpipe. which I think is which is a problem, because 2035 is less than, if you count today, is less than 10 years. I think that's a very challenging roadmap, and we are not there yet. I think since 2020 the uptake has been 3% on EV. If we count that and we push that through to 2035, I don't think we even get there logically. So that is the major problem. That's why Horse Powertrain believes that through a tech-neutral approach, you'll be able to speed up that process. Not necessarily until 2035. I think that might be challenging nonetheless. But and again, EV is the future, to paraphrase von der Leyen in her recent speech. But I don't know. We can't say that date in 2035 we'll be able to reach. But if you have a tech-neutral approach, you'll be able to achieve that much better. If I can illustrate one example of how actually tech neutrality could enhance or speed up towards electrification. So it was mentioned earlier, the importance of hybrid system, and one component of that is the range extenders. So range extenders, basically, to say it simplistically, it's a small engine put into a full electric car. It's connected not to the wheels, but to a generator that then is connected to the battery. So basically, the engine will feed into the battery. Let's say you're driving from typical Brussels to Strasbourg. You're not going to get there. Maybe with your EV, let's say 80% of the battery has depleted. While driving, the engine will start to kick in to make sure that you'll still be able to arrive to your destination. This technology is being picked up, right? This is being picked up by OEMs. They believe this could be very interesting. If you look into Brazil, there are other reasons why in Brazil, for example, this is interesting, and we're already working there with a bus manufacturer. The reason why in Brazil a range extender is very interesting, because people there are not very eager to wait for 20 minutes on an electrification charge station, because it's not very safe. So for that reason, the range extender could also be very interesting. So, but what it does, it addresses directly one of the major obstacles for people to buy an electrical vehicle, and that is range anxiety. Range extenders address that issue. So, but that obviously requires still some level of combustion, and that can be, of course, by renewable, alternative fuels, e-fuels, all of that for the future. But you will enhance the uptake of EVs through that. So it's not one against the other. It's different technologies that will support each other, that are complementary to get to that goal.
That's great. That really does sound like a game changer, because, as you say, that is one of the most common criticisms leveled against EVs, that you hear a lot in America, where previously you could drive across the country. What are you going to do if you have to keep, the range is just not up to it. But as you say, Brussels to Strasbourg is déjà a problem, and that's, it's not just an American concern. So thank you, that's great. So the last of our panels, panelists, that I'll address before opening up, Massimiliano Vascotto, who's head of public affairs at ACEA, which again I think we're all familiar with. Could you talk a little bit about what we've already touched on, the CO2 standards for cars and vans that the Commission's set to review, and we trust it always sticks to its deadlines? Can you share your views on what the Commission might do in that context, particularly perhaps, given the topic today regarding fuels themselves?
Oh, I wish I knew. As we all know, there will be a package of reforms coming in on the 10th of December from the European Commission. This package of reforms, or within this package of reforms, the Commission will be looking at CO2 standards for vehicles. And based on the previous iteration of the file, we know that fuels will be part of these discussions. Now, it's true, there is a ban on internal combustion engines, or better, there's a 100% reduction target as of 2035. And today, the legislation only and exclusively looks at tailpipe emissions, which basically means that whatever you put into these vehicles, be it a sustainable fuels, be it renewable fuels, be it carbon neutral fuels, if we ever agree on a definition of those, would not be able to count towards compliance to the targets. That's a problem. The Commission is looking into that. Now, we do not know how. The Commission will most probably be addressing the issue. Our expectation is that there will be a twofold approach, as an association representing the main European automotive manufacturers, we would hope to see a kind of carbon fuel coefficient some call it a carbon correction factor, looking at how fuels can play a role into the decarbonization of industry, to recognize indeed that not all fuels are the same. Some fuels have a lot less of a greenhouse gas emissions or impact, and therefore recognize that in the computation of how much a vehicle actually emits. And the big question in the room, the big elephant in the room, is what happens after 2035. We do not expect the Commission to change the targets, or we do not expect von der Leyen to propose anything different from the 100% that is currently in the legislation. Now, if there were to be fuel flexibilities, if there were to be openness to vehicles running exclusively on renewable, carbon neutral fuels, that's a different story. Of course, this is only about new vehicles, because the legislation only mandates everything that has to do from factories that our OEMs produce. This does not mean that the decarbonization of fuels stops there. On the contrary, the existing fleet is really where renewable fuels can have a huge role. If you think about vehicles, well, the vehicles that are today on the market, they run on average on Europe 18 years, depending on the member state. But then you see that those are emissions that will continue to be there long after 2035, when the last, well, according to the plan today, the last internal combustion engines will be able to be sold. And therefore, all the work that can be done up until 2035 and well beyond 2035 to decarbonize the fuels is essential to make sure that the decarbonization of road transport does not remain as a conceptual, dogmatic fight over a ban or a non-ban of the internal combustion engine, but we are really credible in reducing the CO2 emissions from road.
That's great. Sorry, I wasn't checking text messages there. I was just looking at Slido because we have some questions already coming in. One for you, saying, can you say a little more about how you envisage renewable fuels and electrification working together to help the EU achieve a reduction in emissions?
Absolutely. The main problem that we are facing as an industry is that today, if one looks only and exclusively at tailpipe emissions, the role of fuels is pertinent and relevant only up until 2035. That is a problem. That's a problem for investments. That's a problem for all of the work that we've heard up until now in terms of reducing imports of these vehicles, feedstock, farmers, sustainability, so on and so forth. Now, the system has to change for it to be a credible pathway also after 2035. And again, a so-called carbon correction factor, a so-called integration of or recognition of lower GHG reductions from renewable fuels can only work so far. The Commission really has to deliver on what they mean by vehicles running exclusively on renewable carbon neutral fuels. They're tasked to do so in the review, and then open up the door to having a long-term discussion on the role of fuels. Of course, beyond that, it's clear that as our colleague from Horst correctly pointed out, technology neutrality is really essential for consumer choice, to allow consumers to slowly migrate towards more decarbonized options in the car park. And therefore, really, as an industry, we do not see one and only technology being there in 2035 or beyond. There will be a mix. Electrification, as we've heard before, will be one, if not the core pathway there, but that does not mean that fuels cannot and should not play a role.
Great, thank you. I'm going to take one more from Slido before opening to the audience. I think it's probably for Hans, given the question I gave him, but if anyone wants to respond, it's, are biofuels truly carbon neutral when you consider the full life cycle emissions? Hans, do you want to try that, or shall I?
That's a tricky one.
I'm anonymous on this, so I don't know who you have to criticize.
So can you repeat the question?
Are biofuels truly carbon neutral when you consider the full life cycle emissions?
I think that's open for debate. Look, I mean, in terms of alternative definitions on this, there has been dispute between the different DGs in the Commission. I remember that, you had DG Klima that came up that within the whole supply chain life cycle, if you will, it should be 100%, but that doesn't even make sense because not even an EV would be 100%. I think then DG Growth suggested 70%, which is more aligned with what the Renewable Energy Directive indicates. If you're having a realistic approach, for sure this will have a massive impact on lowering carbonization. I think that's essential. I mean, there are many other variables that are in place here, right? I think later on we can talk about the whole competitiveness and you know what Europe's bring into combustion and these types of technologies. But if you're only going to have that one single EV pathway and you know diluting or demoting, let's say, these types of fuels as the only region in the world, how will that you know make sure that we can remain on our feet strongly as a global partner in the rest of the world? I think that's also an important question. But when it comes to, you know, is it entirely, or can it reach out to, can it accelerate the net zero goals? Absolutely.
Thank you. Alarik, I think you wanted to comment.
Well, on the calculations and so on, when we are saying, for example, 79% average for ethanol, and we are saying 98%, this is, the calculation is done according to what is stated in the Renewable Energy Directive. So this is by European law. It has to be certified by independent party. And how it is calculated, it is including everything. It's including the emissions from the production of the fertilizers that are used for the crop production. You're including the fuel being used for the tractors and the machines, the transports, emissions from the soil, emissions from running the biorefinery. So everything is included. So this is not something that we are making up or we have our own methodology. This is by European law, and I think the Renewable Energy Directive, now we're on the third one, it has been scrutinized a lot of times. Several experts, researchers, the industry, NGOs, and so on have had their say. And I think it is accepted as it is, this calculation methodology. If you would ask us, we would say that the default values that are in the annexes of that directive are not really in line with reality. The default values are too high compared to what we can see from real numbers from agricultural production, for example.
Claude, did you want to?
Just to add that we are able to improve these values with farming practices. We may have better values, but this means that we'll increase the cost. So we can also be better as renewables. Well, can use them today, but if we are becoming better and better, this means that the cost will increase. So it's a choice. Will this cost be less than electricity or not? But today it's less.
It's always a trade-off, but as you say, we're not just making all this up. Massimiliano, do you want to comment on this one? You okay? You're happy? Did you want to come back in, Alarik? You look like you have. You don't have to.
We have been improving. If you look on the average number for the European ethanol, we have been moving from about 50% of CO2 reduction level up to the 79 where we are now, and I think we will continue. Our vision is to reach 100% of CO2 savings for European ethanol. We cannot say a year for that, but it's possible. I mean, we can prove it from our side. We are reducing by 98%. Some batches, we are reducing the CO2 by 130%. So it's, let's say, a climate negative type of fuel because we are capturing the CO2 from the fermentation and then we are using that for different industrial applications. So and this can be copy and paste for more or less all ethanol plants in Europe, no problem.
Climate negative, that's what we like to hear. Are there any questions in the room? I have anonymous questions here on Slido. Is anyone here? Yes, well, please say, give your name if you want to, but say who your question is for. Thank you. Do we have a microphone for the room, or? We might. If not, we can have mine.
Do you want to have one here? We might. Yeah, take this one. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm Tanveer Ahmed. I work at ACEA, so along with Max, focusing on commercial vehicles. Thank you to the panelists and the organizers, most importantly. So my question is focusing on commercial vehicles, of course. So the most importantly, the factor when you want to buy a heavy-duty vehicle is total cost of ownership, TCO as we say it. And it's important to take into consideration HDVs, considering that they are contributing to an enormous part of emissions when it comes to road transport emissions in itself. Over the last 15 years, battery costs have come down from close to 1,500 euros per kilowatt hour to now currently anywhere between 120 to 130. Ethanol prices do not have a similar trajectory in terms of reducing costs. They are still a commodity in comparison to battery technology, which, as I said, is a technology. So this sees a clear fall when it comes to economies of scale. How do you think bioethanol and renewable fuels can convince a fleet operator who is dependent on knowing what his future costs will be, and knowing that investing in battery electric vehicles would result in future costs going down in comparison to investing in renewable fuel technology as part of his fleet, when the same consideration that prices will go down does not necessarily exist? I understand that you could say that prices fluctuate even in the electricity sector, but ethanol and bioethanol has a nuance wherein it is not just dependent on production of electricity per se, but also dependent on feedstock applying, and feedstock itself has its own volatility. So there are two factors in the case of bioethanol, whereas in the case of HDVs and electrification, the cost of the technology is continuously going down. Whether electricity prices are volatile or not, happy to debate that. But how can you convince a fleet operator to invest in renewable fuels when prices of battery electric vehicles are going to go down predictably, and they would want to invest in this going forward? Thank you very much.
Question to anyone in particular, or do you want the whole panel to? Who would like to pick that one up?
Well, I need to repeat, I don't think it's electricity against biofuels. We still, in Europe, we are facing a challenge with 93% of fossil energy in the transport sector, and that is the main challenge. We will never, I don't think anyone here is young enough to live until we have phased out the fossil energy in the transport sector in Europe, actually. I'm afraid that is the fact. So I think we should work together, and for different applications, in some applications electricity is the cheapest, but for some it's not. Depends on what kind of application. If you have heavy transport, long distance, electricity it will take some time until that is competitive. And as it is today, if you look on the market, biofuels are cheaper, and I think it will be for some time still. There is a reason why biofuels are 50 times bigger than electricity for road transports in Europe, and I think that is the price and the total cost of ownership and driving. And I think there will also be improvements on the combustion engine, because you can see there is a gradual increase in the utilization of the energy, the fuel you're using. I don't know, the best now is 45%, at least maybe 50% of energy utilization, and that is increasing also. So I think that, and I think electricity, I'm not sure it will be that cheap in the future if we will start phasing out all the fossil energy, because wind and solar is cheap, but that is just very depending on the weather, and you need alternatives to that. And if you look on it, you need nuclear power, I think, in Europe, and I don't know if that will fly, and it's extremely expensive. That is, I think, the most expensive way to produce electricity, and I don't think we can replace all the fossil-based electricity in Europe with wind and solar power. And I think we have utilized more or less all the hydropower capacity we can, because also you have the biodiversity issue with hydropower plants and so on, the dams. So if you want to produce that much electricity, you will end up with nuclear power production, I think. And that is, as we know, there are some issues with that in most countries, and it's extremely expensive. We are having such a discussion in Sweden now, where some political parties really are pushing for more nuclear power in Sweden. We have quite a lot already. The main obstacle is the cost, because it's extremely expensive.
Thank you. And that actually leads on to, I've just had a thought experiment sent in through Slido. What if a magic omnibus cut out all European legislation on biofuels and just let the market and innovation play their role? Could that work? Massimiliano, do you want to have a go at that one?
I mean, the main issue with the integration of fuels in a legislation or a sector as important as road transport is that today, if things don't change, the recognition of any decarbonization effort is very minimal. So all of the conversations that we're having with fuel producers, or associations, is the fact that in order to guarantee certainty of investments going forward, in order to guarantee higher volumes of renewable fuels, low carbon fuels in the market, there has to be the possibility to include and use the volumes that come from road transport even past 2035. Today, that is not possible given the regulation. So an omnibus regulation on fuels would be great, but if you don't solve the issue of not being able to sell vehicles consuming fuels after 2035, then yeah, you have the sustainable aviation fuels, then you have maritime, and you have to migrate the use of fuels in other means of transport, which I understand would not be enough to guarantee those kind of investments needed to fully decarbonize the fuel industry.
So I think this is actually a magic omnibus that instead of regulation, which is what we normally get, actually scraps regulation and lets the market and innovation play their role on their own.
Yes, I mean, you asked before what is actually making us not to use more biofuels and producing more biofuels in Europe. But I think everything is there. We have the capital, we have the competence, we have the highest level of CO2 savings in the world, I think. Not only us, but the average in Europe of the ethanol production, and I know the biodiesel is very good as well. So we have the competence, we have the feedstock, because there is a massive surplus of agricultural commodities in Europe. The main issue for agriculture and farmers during the last 4 decades has been the low prices on what they are producing due to surpluses. The European Commission, DJ Jäger is just a few hundred meters away here, they've been paying farmers for decades not to produce. Okay? The area we have as set aside in Europe, I think it's maybe 5 times bigger than the area we are using for ethanol crops. So the thing that is really hindering us from producing more is those European regulations and law. We have the cap of 7% in red, and we have a number of examples of discrimination of first-generation biofuels. In moral, you have what we spoke about here, the CO2 regulations for vehicles. We have the regulation on aviation, as well as on maritime, where you're only allowed to use so-called advanced biofuels. State aid rules, we have the energy taxation directive, the taxonomy. There is a long list, and it is definitely discriminated. And why is that? If we can produce this fuel at a low cost, it's sustainable, and we are using so much imported fossil fuel that are actually damaging the climate. I think we are using about 1 billion liters of fossil fuels per day.
Wow, that's big numbers. Claude, did you want to comment on any of that? This getting rid of some of the regulation, ending the discrimination, anything you want to say there?
I think that for farmers, they don't understand why there is this discrimination. Because today what we see is that, as said Alarik, there are surplus there, the costs are, the prices are low, and yes, it was in 1992 we set aside, at this time it was 15 to 20% of agricultural area. I can take the French situation today. Biofuels represent 3% of total utilized area in France. So quite nothing. It's less than the variation each year with the crops. And this is also an element of a balance. If we are producing these crops and we use part of them for biofuel, if there is an issue with climate on food, they are still there. We still have this foodstuff for food. And this is also part of the elements. And we are, I think that a lot of time we are thinking, I would say by silo. Biofuel is not only a question of reduction of emissions. It's all the elements this represent as bioeconomy on local areas. This means jobs there, this means industry there, this means that there will be some income in these areas. And I think that we don't take this into account so much. We are only saying that no, we should go to electricity, but in these areas where we are producing biofuels, maybe we need some time before we have sufficient infrastructures to be able to use only electricity there. I know that if it not works tomorrow, we need some decades there.
Some decades, okay. We have some decades. Hans, you look like you wanted to comment. No, okay. Do we have anything else from the audience, from the real people in the room with these real problems? And I should warn the panel actually at the end, while this is all going on, at the end I'm going to ask you all to respond on the same question. We heard in the very first keynote presentation, the goals in Europe, the net zero goals are clear. How we get there and if we get there depends on the decisions the decisions we make now. So at the end I'll be asking you each for one priority decision that has to be made right now. So think about that while we're going through the questions in the room and on my phone. So nothing from real people. I'll stick with my Slido. So I think this one also is for Claude actually. To what degree, you've covered this to some extent, to what degree can the production of high protein feed displace the loss of agricultural production that results from using land for biofuel production? Is that clear? No, I don't think so either actually. I'm reading, okay. So,
but maybe
can the production of, scrap the what degree, can the production of high protein feed compensate for the loss of agricultural production that results from using land for biofuel?
Today,
Yeah.
when you are producing biofuels, when you are crushing, for instance, maybe it's the same for ethanol. You use your crop, and at the end you have a liquid biofuel and you have protein. When we are producing today, I will say biodiesel, for instance, when we are crushing rapeseed, we have at least 36% rich protein material that we are using for feed. If we are growing a crop, protein crop, we are less than 20%, except if we are producing soybean. But soybean is not really a crop for Europe today. Maybe it's not enough sun and degrees to have them today. So today we are not able to displace these because it's not the price of a protein that is making the price of the whole crop. Today it's the most of the part is the price of a biofuel on the oil content. For instance, in rapeseed, maybe it's quite different in ethanol, I know less, but for us, it's the main price is oil.
Well, I mean, if you about the land and we are when you use grain to produce ethanol and the other byproducts, about 1/3 of the grain we're using is becoming fuel ethanol. The other 2/3 are becoming protein products, carbonic acid, and that we are capturing biochemicals, and then where perhaps if there is even some residues over, like slurry, we can use that to produce biogas. So it's only 1/3 of the grain. So if you have 3 kilos of grain and you put that into our biorefinery, only 1 kilo of that will become biofuel. So 2/3 are used for something else, and that we should remember that the volumes that we are using for the biofuel production, not everything goes to the fuel production. The main share by volume is actually going to other type of applications. And in the protein case, it's replacing imported soya mainly from central Brazil.
If I may add, only for oilseeds, we have only 45% content of oil. The other part is protein.
Thank you. Sorry, please go ahead, Hans.
Well, I actually have a question for the speakers, but
also good.
Recently the von der Leyen, she mentioned, I can't remember in what context it was, but that you would look into assessing the value of advanced biofuels rather, so second generation biofuels as opposed to first ones. Could you, it's interesting for me to hear, could you maybe, and probably the audience too, explain the difference and perhaps why second generation wouldn't be as ideal as first?
Well, I think the main problem is that it's more expensive to use that type of feedstock to produce biofuels, and there are also limitations when it comes to the feedstock, the volumes. We are producing second generation biofuels as well. We have done that, I don't know, 10, 15 years. And we are reusing residues from food industries and so on. And we are sourcing that type of feedstock from all over Sweden, Finland, a little bit from Estonia and Denmark. And that is representing, I would say, roughly 15% of our total production. And that shows that we need to be collecting this in a number of countries, and we are still not even close to half of our production. It's only 15%. It's more expensive, and then this is still food industry byproducts or residues. If you want to use, for example, straw or residues from the forest industry, we have massive amounts of that in Sweden. It's very expensive because the technology you need and is much more complicated. It is becoming much, much more expensive. And that is, I think, is why maritime and the aviation industry, they want to get away from this obligation that they only are allowed to use second generation biofuels because they are much more expensive. We have been doing a lot of research, a lot of investments in using straw, for example, because that is, of course, also from the farmers. We could do it. I mean, we have known that technology for 150 years. It's just that it is more expensive and no one is willing to pay for it. And there is also a limitation when it comes to the feedstock. The grain we're using, or the rapeseed, we are producing millions and millions of tons of that each year. So there is a, and as I said, there is a surplus of it. And I think just another, when you look on who is producing second generation ethanol in Europe, it's only companies that have started producing first generation. There is no one else producing. There has been some attempts, but they are not on the market. Yeah, they failed, unfortunately.
Thank you. That's very clear. Sorry, Claude, did you have another point there?
Just in addition to what said Alarik, when we are producing a second generation, you need waste and residues, okay, but we also have to maintain the organic matter of the soil. So we can't export all the residues from our crops to do this, because we have also to maintain our soils. And the other issue is that we are seeing that today we are importing most of these waste and residues, a lot of them. And if I may, it's also an issue for fraud. We have seen this in used cooking oils, for instance, that what arriving was not used cooking oil, it was palm oil. But there was a lot of questions with this. And maybe we can say that we also want energy directive that is working for Europeans. What we are able to do in Europe first.
I just think that's it's quite indicative of the Commission to push the boundaries. This is an example of that, but not taking to the equation a number of variables that are at play that were not considered. So when I read that, the reference that President von der Leyen did, surely I understand there's reasons for this in terms of decarbonizing, but there's so many other factors at play that should be taken into account as well as for European industry, and that sometimes is lacking.
Yeah, it does. Sorry, it looks. Quite often with the EU, with the Commission, we're all looking for one simple solution, which for a long time now has been electrify everything, as if electricity was this magic thing that comes out of the air, and it's not. Frequently, mostly generated from fossil fuels. And what you're all saying now, what we've heard from the keynotes as well, we have some very powerful existing solutions. To some extent, this seems like a no-brainer. And it's not replacing one simplistic solution with another simplistic solution. But do you think the message is now getting through? Because it's a slightly more nuanced message than we normally get. We get electrify everything, or go 100% nuclear, or whatever, which wouldn't be from the Commission, okay? But some countries, that's the answer. This is more nuanced, but does seem, as I say, like a no-brainer. Do you think the message is getting through now that this just has to be, Massimiliano?
To some extent.
Yeah.
I mean, the approach that has been taken up until now is an approach that looks at whatever comes out of the tailpipe of a vehicle, and therefore an electric vehicle does not have a tailpipe. and therefore does not have emissions, and therefore that vehicle is a zero-emission vehicle. It's clear that the second that you start looking into what goes into the technologies of those vehicles, you look into supply chains, you look into critical raw materials, you look into the energy mix that is recharging that vehicle, the situation is a lot more complex. Sometimes the simple solution, so looking at what is measurable and is there high levels of CO2, high level of NOx outside, coming out of a vehicle, is not the best way. So I think that is being understood. Also, we're moving into a reality in which emissions will naturally have to be, or no matter what happens with the automotive industry, the future will be a mix between electricity being the core technology and a number of other technologies to complement that decarbonization. But eventually we'll have to look into other parameters to further decarbonize these products. And so life cycle assessments are being made. Battery electric vehicles are not being will not be considered zero emissions anymore, and then we'll open another can of worms with a more complex system that should integrate all of the supply chain, what goes into a vehicle, and not only what happens between the tank and the wheel.
Yeah, just to give a quick anecdote, I think they're hearing this. You know, it's very striking. So the Commissioner for Trade, when he went to India back in September to discuss EU-India trades, this was in New Delhi, he said something really funny. He said, wouldn't it be amazing that EU and India, you know, the third and fourth largest car-making regions, would join forces to, you know, take the lead in combustion excellence and in electrification? Combustion excellence, that's great, but how are we going to do that if we're going to stop it by 2035? There's not going to be any incentives for industry to flourish if the region itself isn't going to incentivize it anymore. It's basically going to ban it. So it was funny that you said it. Funnily enough, it was in the speech, but afterwards when I saw the communication, it was no longer there. So I'm not sure, you know, whether he. But the speech is still public, so you could basically look it online.
You go and hear it all. Did anyone want to? You're all happy there. This is good. Can I, before we're going to run out of time soon, but I think we now have some questions in the audience. I just want to ask one last one I've got on Slido, because I think it's a big issue. It's this question of making sure that, well, everything, but in this case, renewable fuels are accessible to everybody, particularly people who on lower incomes. How can we make sure that is the case? Because it's been perceived as taking people's cars away from them, going away from the combustion engine, and people's cars it's not just sentimental value, they mean a lot, they're your job. So this issue of making renewable fuels accessible to everyone, what needs to be done and can it be done?
It has to be done, meaning that affordability is probably the number one problem that currently exists in the decarbonization, in the market permeation of some of these zero-emission technologies. Cars cost too much, and their equivalents running on an internal combustion engine cost significantly less. So affordability is a problem that the industry is facing with now. The affordability of fuels is a completely different situation. Because whilst it can be seen as a stick rather than a carrot to encourage people to move into electric mobility, you're also penalizing usually the people that cannot afford otherwise. And therefore, it's important that there is a decarbonization of fuels. You cannot take vehicles away from people, but these fuels have to be equally as affordable than what their fossil alternatives currently are. So yes, let's decarbonize fuels. Yes, let's not increase the cost of fuels, because if not, you really are putting consumers between a rock and a hard place, and that we don't want to do.
But how can that be done? Because you're right, it has to be done. It's a very sensitive issue, but making fuels affordable, it's not that simple. I mean, the MEP touched on taxation for issue. None of these are simple problems. What would be the solution?
I mean, Taxation is probably, I don't know exactly the margins of different fuel producers, but taxation is a big component in fuels, and the Energy Taxation Directive does differentiate massively on how to tax the different fuels. It's equally true that the revenues coming from fuels from the different member states, so additional taxations imposed at national level, obviously also distorts massively the market. We've seen what happened in France, Gilets jaunes on the streets the second that the government wanted to increase tax levies on fuels. This is important that it does not happen. Now, how to balance the fact that producing decarbonized fuels is more expensive, and therefore there would be, to some degree, a cost increase for the consumer. That's unfortunately not on us as vehicle manufacturers. What we can do is we can try to lower as much as possible the products that we put on the market, be it internal combustion engine products, but there we have 25 years of experience. I think we've nailed it down. On the electric side, we're working on that regard. But
I will come back to you, Claude, in a second. I just want to make sure I take the questions in the audience as well.
Yes. Hi, Katarina Maskant, Sustainability Advisor. First, I have 2 points. First, maybe to showcase my ignorance about this technology. Just a question around biofuels and what would be the mixed. Can you run a regular car 100% biofuels, or do we still need to have a mix? I know we've had a lot of discussion in Sweden on mixing this, and pros and cons for your car and filters and whatnot. So maybe just that more technological question. And then secondly, you've kind of touched a little bit on it, but not straight, forward. Because if we want to reap all these benefits for the European farmers, for our economy and competitiveness, we're kind of assuming that all of this will be produced in Europe, whereas, of course, there's a lot of other sources, countries producing biofuels in the world. We talk about here we have 1 harvest per year. I heard that in Brazil you have 3 harvests per year. So that you can think about what kind of volumes and what kind of prices that might be. So maybe again, even in that perspective, can we be competitive, or will we be kind of opening up a market which will mainly then be flooded from other countries? Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think those 2 important topics. Maybe Hans, would you be able to take the technical question on the, can you just put biofuel in your regular car? And then maybe Claude, you could take the second one on the competition. Also on that, does anyone want to pick up what the MEP said on Mercosur and the huge problem that seems to create? Hans, are you happy to take the first?
Yeah, just the first. I can't really say much about it, but as I said before, we are operating as well in Brazil, and there we are experimenting for the market with E85, for example. But when you ask me, for example, E100, I wouldn't be able to, respond to that good question. But I know there's a lot of difficulty surrounding technicalities and stuff. But maybe my counterparts know more about that too.
Well, yeah, you mentioned E85. That's an obvious solution, and we've had it for years in Sweden. So, okay, it's not 100%, but it's 85% of ethanol. It's much better than 0%. So that is one option. It's quite cheap to convert if it's not converted, so to say, when the car is produced. I think it's roughly 300-400 euro to convert a conventional petrol car to a flex fuel vehicle, as we call it, that then can run on pure petrol or all the way, the whole range up to 85% of ethanol. So that is for the petrol engine. If you look on the diesel engine, you can use biodiesel plus HVO, and then you will have a 100% of renewable fuel, biofuel in it. I'm running my diesel Volvo on that. Works very well. A little bit more expensive, and coming back to the incentives, in Sweden we've had for several years a tax break on the biofuels. So we don't pay any tax on the biofuel, but you pay full tax on the fossil fuel. And it can make the biofuel very competitive. There is a small difference, but that depends on oil prices, biofuel prices, and so forth, and of course the level of taxation. So if you would increase the taxes on fossil energy and fossil fuels in Sweden just a little bit, the HVO 100, for example, would be cheaper to use. And that you can use more or less in any modern diesel vehicle. And a lot of heavy transports are also using only HVO 100 in Sweden.
Thank you. Claude on the international context, and then I'm going to take one last question from the audience.
Okay, just to add on the fiscal issue, that's today producing biofuels is more expensive than using oil, of course. And this is why we have some concern also with the discussion now on the taxation directive. What is the signal when we say that at the long term we want the same taxation for oil and for biofuels? There is a question that we don't understand. What is the main issue for us, reducing emission or not? On the competitive issue, it's not so easy because we are not at all in the same climate. We are not at all speaking of the same thing. I will take the example of soybean because it's different. When we are producing oil seeds in Europe, we have 40%, 45% oil contained, and the rest is protein. When you are producing soybean in Brazil, for instance, it's 80% protein and only 20% oil. The price of soybean is the protein, it's not the oil content. So we can't put in the same way of calculating. The other issue is that we in Europe we are only able to do one harvest. That's because of the climate, but this is maybe it's not the only issue. The issue is also all the rules we have on the way to produce. We are not at all in the same condition of production. This is also an element of distortion in the competition we may have. And the last element maybe I may speak about is we want to reduce our dependency. So the issue is, are we ready to pay a little bit more to have our own production? I will say today we are depending from Russia or Arabic countries for oil. We don't want to be dependent from Brazil tomorrow from biodiesel or ethanol.
Thank you. It's always a big question. Are we prepared to pay a little bit more? I'm going to take one last audience question because I know we're running out of time. Do say if your question is to anyone in specific or for the whole
first of all, good afternoon or good evening. It's not actually a question, it's just a remark to complement what was already said by Alarik Sandrup. My name is Carlo Bertomiani. I work for ePURE, where I'm managing technical policy and sustainability. I just wanted to complement what was just said about blends of renewables and fossil and also 100% renewable fuels. What Alarik just said about E85 is absolutely correct. But I would like to complement that with, I would say, information about what is currently being developed. So actually, as a matter of fact, in the very near future, you might have 100% renewable E85 in Europe. This is something that is already being developed at CEN, which is the European Committee for Standardization. And it's something that already exists, for instance, in California, where you already have on the market 100% renewable blend of E85. So you have up to 85% ethanol, and then you have other renewable components, which could be bio-naphtha, e-naphtha, ethanol gasoline, methanol to gasoline, and so on. So there are other renewable fuels which are added to ethanol in order to come up with 100% renewable blend. So at the end of the day, it will be 100% renewable fuel, and this is actually where ethanol shines as an enabler of CO2 neutral fuels. So actually, this is, as I said, this is being developed at CEN, so this is being standardized right now as we speak. There is a lot of interest from the industry, and so once the standard is revised and we have the opportunity to actually blend other renewable fuels into E85, then at the end of the day, we will actually have a CO2 neutral fuel option also for cars running on a gasoline engine. So this is something that I wanted to complement, to give a complete information, not only on what exists right now, but also about what will be available in the very near future.
Good, that's a good positive note to finish on, the very near future. So I'm going to, before we move to the drinks and snacks area where we can continue this debate, I'm going to as I said, I would pose every panelist this question based on the first intervention. Net zero goals are clear. How we get there and if we get there depends on the decisions we make now. So I want one priority decision that should be made now from each of the panelists, please. I'll start at the far end and work along, please.
Okay. Yes, I think we should remove all the discrimination that there is in European legislation against first-generation biofuels. That would release great potential to reduce the emissions, bring more income to the farmers, produce more protein, and so forth and so forth. I cannot see any reason why it should be there. It's indicative that you're banning one technology if you don't believe in your own technology, I must say.
Thank you. Hans?
Incorporate the tech neutrality principle within the CO2 emission standards and make it or underpin it by an honest measuring tool, an LCA tool for CO2 emissions. If you really want to address CO2, then do that honestly and in the entire lifespan. And thirdly, this will make sure that we can get to net zero, but also make sure that we can protect the industry that used to flourish in Europe. The Chinese, who are now flourishing on the car manufacturing, they used to come to us to understand how a car works. Now it's the other way around. We need to find a balance here and making sure that we can flourish the industry and that we will not have the indication that tells us that we will have 500,000 people losing their jobs by 2040 into this one-way path for EVs, but that we have an open vision to make sure that we can secure jobs and our competitiveness.
Thank you, Claude. One priority decision now.
I think I will say the same as Alarik. Recognize all the benefits of first generation and stop discriminating them.
Massimiliano, yours is the final word.
Yikes. I think technology neutrality, pushing for technology neutrality is very important. Let's not forget, though, that the decisions in terms of the future of the automotive industry are not being taken now. They have been taken 10, 15 years ago. There's development cycles which take very long time within the industry. So everything that is today in the legislations, everything that is future-proof is something that the industry has been working on for the past 20 years, which is why tech neutrality is important to guarantee a lot of technologies playing a role going forward. Some of these decisions, strategic decisions, have already been taken. Now we need to execute and implement.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everyone on the panel and to everyone in the room. I think we have one key message to take away from us, which is we are not in the lab, we're in the real world. So let's make this real. Let's make it really work. Thanks very much.